Now, what I think is so, I mean, one of the things I find so interesting about you, the rest of the PayPal guys, they get done with PayPal, they start starting and investing in Web 2.0 companies at a point in time when everyone said, that's insane. That's insane. The internet will never come back. They were considered the crazy ones. Meanwhile, you move to LA and start working on Solar City, SpaceX, Tesla's a glint in your eye. Why didn't you, will you ever do an internet company again? Do you find the internet boring?
I think it's unlikely that I'll do an internet company again because, not that I find the internet boring. I mean, I'm still sort of, I think I'm relatively sort of net savvy and interested in the internet and what's going on. You know, I don't ever want to be the like grandpa who doesn't do email or something like that. You know, I think, but I think. I'm trying to allocate my efforts to that which I think would most affect the future of humanity in a positive way. And I think there's lots of entrepreneurial energy and financing headed towards the internet, whereas in certain sectors like automotive and solar and space, you don't see new entrants. There's not a lot of capital going to startups and not a lot of entrepreneurs going into those arenas. And the problem is that in the absence of some new entrants into an industry, you don't have that force for innovation. It's really new entrants that drive innovation more than anything. That's why I have devoted my efforts to those industries. And there are industries that require, as I said, quite a bit of capital to get going. Even with SpaceX, I mean, I invest. My proceeds from PayPal after tax were about $180 million. 100 of that went into SpaceX, 70 into Tesla, and 10 into Solar City. And I literally had to borrow money for rent. That was
that
a close
the plan?
Call. No, that was not the plan.
So what was the plan? You thought, oh, I'll just put 10 in each of these, or?
Well, actually, I thought the SpaceX. I thought it would be about. Well, I guess I was probably about double. It would cost. It ended up being double in most cases. So with SpaceX, I thought it would be 50. With Tesla, I thought it'd be putting in 25, maybe 30. With Solar City, Solar City actually went really well. And that's the one where I wasn't a co-founder, so maybe that's a good sign. I mean, I should co-found less stuff. So that's.
So what happened? Why did you have to put more money in the other two? Or did investors flake? Did you have?
Well, I didn't actually seek investor funding for the first 3 rounds of SpaceX because I mean the first thing that investors want to ask you is sort of, well, tell us about prior successes in this field, and you know, what could we compare this to? And there's, you know, when you've got kind of the donut in the success category and a lot of, you know, a cemetery full of failures, then they're not that keen. And I mean, rockets are just pretty far out of the comfort zone of most venture capitalists. Now, we were able to get venture funding after we've made some progress and demonstrated that we were able to almost get to orbit. You know, credit goes to sort of to Founders Fund, and which is obviously some of my compatriots from PayPal, Peter Thiel and Luke Nosek and Ken Howry and the other guys. So. And they invested before we got to orbit, so credit to them for that. But I did have to show that I could actually make stuff. Like I never actually made physical stuff before, you know, before SpaceX. So let alone rockets.
So you started with a rocket.
Yeah, I mean that's a hard one, and it's the probability of success was low. In fact, when I started SpaceX, I thought that the most likely outcome was failure. And I think to have any other expectation would have been irrational. So
why did you want to do it? I know for Tesla it seems more obvious, like, oh, save the planet, big automakers aren't doing this. I mean, I think it's sort of fairly obvious why it's good for humanity. Why did you feel like SpaceX needed to be done?
Well, I guess if you look at the trajectory of space technology and progress, the pinnacle of that progress was around maybe 1969, 1970, with the moon missions. And so we made incredible progress in the 60s, and then we were able to land on the moon. And then with the space shuttle, we could only get people to low Earth orbit. Now the space shuttle is retired, and that's just there's no trajectory of improvement. It's a trajectory to nothing. So, and I kept thinking that there'd be some plan to send people to Mars, because that's the obvious next step. And the actual origin of SpaceX is when I was, I think it was around 2001 or so, and I was visiting a friend of mine, Adair Ressi, who actually you may have met, but he lives in Palo Alto now. We were college housemates, and he asked me what I was going to do after PayPal, and I said, well, I've always been interested in space, but I didn't think that there was anything I could do in space as an individual. So my initial plan in space was actually to do a small mission to Mars with a greenhouse, essentially seasoned dehydrated nutrient gel in a little greenhouse that would land, and you'd hydrate the gel, and then you'd grow the plants, and you'd have this great shot of green plants on a red background, and that would be the money shot, essentially. And the people tend to respond to precedents and superlatives, and this would be the furthest that life's ever traveled, the first life on Mars, as far as we know. And that would get people excited. And I thought, well, that would result in an increased NASA budget, and then we could send people to Mars, because that's, I think you want to have a future where you're expecting things to be better, not one where you're expecting things to be worse. So that was how things started out. And then as I learned more, and I went to, speaking of crazy things, went to Russia 3 times to negotiate a deal to buy a couple of the largest ICBMs in the Russian fleet. A strange experience.
How do you even get into that negotiation?
Well, you talk to people who know people, and pretty soon you're talking to the Russian rocket forces, and they. It turns out Russia's quite a capitalist society, so but it definitely had some weird meetings in places that I swear they looked like a sanitarium or something. I don't know. It was very odd.
We keep going back to the theme of crazy.
Yeah. Seriously, this place had padded walls. You're like, why do you have padded walls? It was weird. And then I had some sort of Russian guy who was missing a front tooth started yelling at me. Because one of his front teeth was missing, he was like spit flying at me in a place with padded walls. I'm like, this is really bizarre.
What's happened to my life?
Right.
And that was the moment when you thought, I'm going to build my own rocket.
Yeah. That was probably, when I got back from that third trip, I was like, I realized that the real issue, the reason we haven't advanced in space is because the cost of space transportation has become unaffordable. It's become more and more expensive to do less and less in space. And we really need to improve the technology of space transportation. So that's why I started SpaceX. But it may seem odd that I would start SpaceX with an expectation of failure, but bear in mind that my initial thing was to do essentially a philanthropic mission with a 0% chance of success from a financial standpoint. So it would have effectively been a donation to the cause. And so anything better than that is a win.
Right. So, I know people think of you as someone who's had a lot of success, but you had several failures within SpaceX before the recent launch. Can you tell us a little bit about what it's like to put that much work into something and be doing something that really no one else is doing?
Yeah.
And at least trying something and putting that much of your own money in it, that you're having to borrow money from friends to pay your rent, and there are launches and it's failing.
Yeah, it super sucks. I tell you. That was 2008 in particular was awful because we had the third launch failure in a row of our Falcon 1 vehicle at SpaceX, and the Tesla financing round that we were raising fell apart because the economy was going through tailspin, and it's pretty hard to raise money for a startup car company, late 2008 when GM and Chrysler are busy going bankrupt. that was tough. And then SolarCity had to deal with Morgan Stanley, and Morgan Stanley had to renege on the deal because they themselves were running out of money. So it looked like all three companies were going to die, and I was also going through a divorce. So that was definitely a low point. But fortunately, the fourth launch worked, and then.
Did you think the third launch was going to work? Was it a shock that it didn't?
Well, I thought it would I thought the odds of it working were better than 50%. But yeah, there was just a little change in the thrust transient of the first stage engine that resulted in that we couldn't see it on the ground because of the thrust transient. Well, to get slightly technical for a second, the pressure decay on the thrust transient dropped below sea level pressure. So when you look at it on the test stand at sea level, you don't see it. It doesn't look like there's a thrust transient. And because we changed the architecture of the engine to one that was regeneratively cooled instead of ablatively cooled, it had this little tiny transient which caused the first stage to ram the upper stage, and the upper stage engine started inside the interstage section. It's like sort of firing at this engine indoors with a big plasma blowback that fried the upper stage.
Wow.
Yeah, I wasn't expecting that.
So it's 2008. You're going through a divorce, which, like some, to borrow your word, douchebag bloggers are writing about to make even worse.
Right. Yes, that's true. In addition to all that stuff happening, I was getting dumped on massively in the press.
Right.
Yeah.
It looks like all three companies are going to fail. I mean, why do you keep going with all three? Like, I feel like even a lot of great entrepreneurs in that situation would have been like, I've already sunk everything I have in these companies, and I got to pick one. But you didn't. I mean, you kept doing all three. Why?
Yeah, that was a very tough call. At the end of 2008, that was probably one of the toughest calls I've had to make, because I could either reserve capital for one company or the other. I mean, fortunately, SolarCity didn't need a ton of capital, so they were okay. But between SpaceX and Tesla, it's sort of like if you've got two kids, and what do? Do you spend all your money to maximize the probability of success of one, or do you try to keep both alive? Fortunately, it worked.
You also had to step back in as the CEO of Tesla.
Yeah. My goal was never to be the CEO of Tesla. From the beginning, I mean, I've had an interest in electric cars that goes back 20 years to when I was in college. In fact, I used to talk to my dates about electric cars. It's probably not the best strategy.
Close those dates.
No. I usually have to stop talking about that. Yeah, so I've had a long-standing interest in electric cars, but since I was doing SpaceX, I knew that if I did try to start an electric car company and run it, that it would be extremely painful to run two companies. So I really tried my hardest not to be the CEO of Tesla. I mean, at any point from day one, I could have been the CEO because I had majority control of the company.
Right.
But I really tried not to. And in the end, it was at the end of 2008. I had to commit all of my reserve capital to Tesla. All that wasn't allocated to SpaceX, and so I felt I had to sort of steer the ship directly. But it was really not fun, super not fun.
Yeah, I remember when we talked, I guess maybe the next year after that, you said, this is not at the fun level, running these two companies.
No, I mean, it's definitely gotten a lot better. With SpaceX, since we've now had 5 successful launches in a row and we're able to dock with the space station, and with Tesla, we're able to raise enough capital to get the company to be able to produce the Model S and do the IPO. And and I've got a much stronger team, a lot of bench strength at both companies. So I can go from essentially almost every waking hour being spent on the companies to 90%, which is a big difference, actually.
Is the ambition still to find another CEO for one or the other?
Well, I expect to run both companies for the foreseeable future because I've made a commitment to the people at both companies to do that. Will I be running both companies forever? I think that's unlikely, but certainly for the foreseeable future, I will be.
Is there one that has your heart more than the other one?
Well, no, they both do have my heart, but I think that there may come a point, several years in the future, where the fundamental good that Tesla is trying to accomplish, which is to serve as a catalyst for the acceleration of sustainable transport, has been accomplished. In other words, that's really what Tesla, if you look at it from an historical standpoint, or what's important here in affecting the world. It's to what degree is Tesla serving as a catalyst for the advent of electric vehicles? And at some point, when say most cars being manufactured are electric, then that will have been accomplished, and or the catalytic value of Tesla will have been realized, and there'll be diminishing returns in that regard. And I think at that point, I would not need to run the company.